Before we dive into this gripping story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Because what unfolds next is a powerful tale of resilience and unexpected triumph you won't want to miss. Richard Thompson's voice sliced through the chilly December air with an icy finality. "Miss Carter, you need to pack up and leave this apartment immediately. There's been too many lease violations, and I won't tolerate it any longer." His tone was sharp, clipped, leaving no room for negotiation or appeal. The glow of the sparse holiday lights outside the aging brick building did little to soften his words, nor the cold glint in his eyes as he stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching Jasmine Carter with the weight of judgment. Jasmine's gaze remained steady, unflinching beneath the flickering porch light. Though the timing was cruel, this eviction notice coming just days before Christmas, she did not show any outward sign of panic or despair. Instead, she exuded a quiet dignity, her movements deliberate as she began gathering her few belongings. The small apartment around her, modest but tidy, held the echoes of years lived in relative peace, despite the occasional challenges of rent hikes and neighborhood noise. To the casual observer, Jasmine could have been any tenant caught in the merciless gears of landlord power, but something about her calm resilience unsettled Richard. Neighbors peered from behind curtains and cracked doors, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered quietly among themselves. They knew Jasmine, a woman of quiet strength, who always greeted them with a nod or a smile despite her own struggles. The community had witnessed the landlord's growing impatience before, but never with such blunt hostility as tonight. Richard's frustration simmered beneath his composed exterior. He paced the narrow hallway, glancing back at Jasmine with a furrowed brow. "You don't get to stay here. The lease is clear. You've broken the rules, and I have every right to ask you to leave." His voice dipped into a sharper edge as he added, "And with the holidays coming up, I won't have you causing trouble for the other tenants." Jasmine paused, her hands folding over a small box she had packed carefully. "Mr. Thompson," she said evenly, "I've always paid my rent on time. I've kept my apartment in good condition. If there's an issue, I'd appreciate it if you could be specific." Her tone was polite, yet firm. There was no room for argument, only a request for clarity. Richard's eyes narrowed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. The violations are documented." He tapped a folder in his hand, though no papers were offered. "You can't stay here." The tension in the air thickened as Jasmine calmly began stacking her belongings into bags. There was no hysteria, no bitterness, only a subdued strength that belied the storm of emotions beneath. Her eyes met the windows where the neighbors watched, their silent support a subtle defiance against the landlord's harsh decree. A small boy from down the hall lingered near the stairwell, clutching a worn teddy bear, his wide eyes fixed on Jasmine. The building's aging heater rattled unevenly, the sound underscoring the starkness of the moment. Jasmine bent slightly to speak quietly to the child, offering a reassuring smile before continuing her methodical packing. Richard's impatience grew. His foot tapped sharply on the linoleum floor as he barked, "You need to move now. I don't want to hear any more excuses." Jasmine met his gaze once more. "I understand your position, Mr. Thompson. But I ask for a little time to find a new place. This is sudden, and I have nowhere else lined up." Richard's expression hardened. "There's no time for that. You're out. End of story." As the words hung in the air, a murmur rippled through the building. In the flickering hallway light, a few tenants gathered discreetly, their faces etched with concern. Some exchanged glances, others whispered about the injustice, the timing, the manner, the coldness of the eviction. Jasmine's lips pressed together, but she did not argue further. Instead, she moved with a grace that spoke of endurance and hope. She packed the last of her belongings, a small collection of books, a few photographs, a worn coat, and carefully closed the door behind her. The soft click echoed down the corridor, a quiet punctuation to the unfolding drama. Richard stood watching, his expression a mixture of triumph and unease. He had enforced his authority, but the quiet solidarity among the tenants gnawed at his confidence. Jasmine's composed demeanor, coupled with the subtle support she commanded, chipped away at the power he wielded so freely. Outside, the winter wind swept through the streets, scattering fallen leaves and stirring the faint scent of pine and smoke from nearby chimneys. Jasmine stepped onto the cracked sidewalk, her breath visible in the cold air. She paused for a moment, taking in the familiar sights, the flickering street lamp, the worn steps leading up to the building, and then turned toward the darkened cityscape ahead. The neighbors watched her retreating figure, some stepping out to offer a few words of encouragement, others simply nodding in quiet respect. Richard's eyes followed, a flicker of doubt flashing behind his steely exterior. Inside the building, the uneasy calm settled like dust. The tenants exchanged glances, whispers filling the spaces between them. Jasmine Carter, displaced on the eve of the holidays, had become more than just another tenant caught in landlord disputes. She had become a symbol of quiet resistance against the cold machinery of eviction and displacement. Richard retreated into his office, slamming the door behind him. His fingers drummed restlessly on the desk as he stared at the eviction notice he'd hastily prepared. The timing was brutal, but he convinced himself it was necessary, business as usual in a city where power often spoke loudest through eviction notices and final warnings. Yet, beneath his frustration, a seed of unease had taken root. Jasmine's calm resolve unsettled him more than he cared to admit. She was not the frightened tenant he had expected, but a woman with a quiet strength that seemed to ripple outward, touching the building's weary walls and the hearts of those who lived within. Outside, the night deepened. The holiday decorations flickered softly against the darkness, a fragile contrast to the harsh realities unfolding inside the brick walls. Jasmine's figure vanished into the shadows, carrying with her the dignity of someone who refused to be broken by the cold hand of eviction. And in the silence that followed, the building held its breath, waiting, watching, as the story of Jasmine Carter and Richard Thompson's bitter confrontation began to unfold in ways no one could yet foresee. The evening air was thick with a restless energy as a sleek black limousine glided to a smooth stop in front of the aging brick apartment building. The soft hum of its engine and the polished sheen of its surface stood in stark contrast to the chipped paint and flickering streetlights that framed the weary facade. The neighbors, who had gathered earlier to watch Jasmine's forced departure, now found themselves drawn to the unexpected spectacle unfolding before their eyes. Whispers swept through the crowd like wildfire. "Is that Jasmine Carter?" one tenant murmured, eyes wide with disbelief. Another shook her head, incredulous. "I didn't think she had the means for anything like that." The limousine's door opened with a quiet hiss, and Jasmine stepped out, poised and composed, every inch the picture of newfound confidence. Her presence in such an unexpected manner sent ripples through the community, challenging the assumptions that had settled around her like dust. Just days after Richard Thompson's cold eviction order, here she was, arriving not on foot or in a taxi, but in a vehicle that spoke of success and resources far beyond what anyone had imagined. Richard, seated in his cramped office just a floor above the lobby, caught sight of the limousine as it pulled up. His eyes narrowed, disbelief mingling with a simmering frustration. He watched as Jasmine stepped out, her posture unyielding, her expression calm. The landlord's carefully constructed narrative that she was a struggling tenant to be swiftly removed crumbled in that moment. Outside, Jasmine moved with a grace that spoke of quiet determination. She greeted the murmuring neighbors with a nod, her gaze steady despite the curious stares. The rumors began to swirl. How had she come by such means so suddenly? What had changed in the days since the eviction notice? A local shopkeeper, Mr. Delgado, stepped forward, a knowing smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I heard from a friend that Jasmine's been involved with a startup here in the city. Something about tech and innovation. It's been doing real well, they say." His voice carried a hint of pride as he glanced toward the limousine. "Seems she's turned things around faster than anyone expected." The crowd absorbed this revelation with a mix of admiration and astonishment. Jasmine's return was no longer just about reclaiming her place in the building, it was about challenging the very assumptions that had led to her eviction. Her presence became a quiet assertion of power, a refusal to be dismissed or underestimated. Richard's frustration deepened as he paced his office, the walls closing in around him. The landlord who had thought himself in control now faced a tenant who had flipped the script. Jasmine's return in such a commanding fashion was a public rebuke of his authority, and he felt the sting keenly. Downstairs, Jasmine approached the lobby with measured steps. The doorman, a stoic figure accustomed to the building's daily dramas, looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes before he masked it with professional courtesy. Jasmine exchanged a brief nod with him, the unspoken acknowledgement of her changed circumstances hanging in the air. Neighbors began to emerge from their apartments, drawn out by the limousine's arrival and Jasmine's unexpected return. Some offered tentative smiles, others respectful nods. The atmosphere shifted subtly, the air charged with a newfound respect for the woman who had quietly defied the odds. Richard's phone buzzed relentlessly on his desk. Calls from tenants complaining about the disruption, queries from other landlords curious about the sudden turnaround. He ignored them, focusing instead on the folder of eviction notices he had prepared, now feeling like relics of a story rapidly rewriting itself. Jasmine made her way to the building's community notice board, where a flurry of flyers and announcements fluttered in the cold draft. With a steady hand, she pinned a notice of her own, a brief message announcing her intent to address the tenants directly, to discuss the future of the building and the rights of those who called it home. The tenants gathered quickly, their curiosity and hope palpable. Jasmine's voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear, carrying the weight of someone who had faced adversity and emerged strengthened. "I want to thank everyone for your support," she said. "I know these past days have been difficult, but I'm here to stay. Together, we can ensure this building is a place of respect and fairness for all." Her words resonated deeply, cutting through the tension that had settled like a fog over the community. The tenants exchanged glances, their earlier doubts replaced by a growing sense of solidarity. Jasmine was not just a tenant anymore, she was a figure of resilience and change. Meanwhile, Richard sank into his chair, the weight of his miscalculations pressing down on him. The eviction he had wielded like a weapon had backfired, exposing him to scrutiny and undermining his authority. The landlord who had once ruled this building with an iron fist found himself isolated, his power diminished by the quiet strength of a tenant he had underestimated. As night deepened, Jasmine stood at a window overlooking the city streets below. The lights twinkled like distant stars, each one a reminder of the lives intertwined in the fabric of this neighborhood. Her mind raced with plans and possibilities, the future unfolding before her like the pages of a book yet to be written. The limousine waited patiently outside, a symbol of her sudden rise, but also a vessel for the battles yet to come. Jasmine knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she faced it unbowed, her resolve as steady as the city lights that stretched into the darkness. Neighbors lingered outside, their conversations hushed but hopeful. The unexpected return of Jasmine Carter had shifted the balance, transforming the narrative from one of displacement to one of empowerment. The community began to see not just a tenant fighting eviction, but a woman reclaiming her place with dignity and strength. Back in his office, Richard finally picked up his phone, dialing numbers with a new urgency. The game had changed, and he would need to adapt or risk losing everything he thought he controlled. But even as he made calls and plotted his next move, the image of Jasmine stepping out of that limousine, calm, composed, and undeniably powerful, haunted him. Outside, the night air carried the faint echoes of whispered conversations and cautious optimism. Jasmine's unexpected return was more than a moment of triumph. It was the beginning of a story that would challenge the status quo and redefine what it meant to fight for one's home. And beneath the city's restless glow, the building stood silent witness to the unfolding drama, a testament to the resilience of those who refuse to be cast aside, and a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes come from the most unexpected places. Richard Thompson's office was cloaked in dim light, the glow from his desk lamp casting long shadows across the scattered papers and unopened eviction notices. His fingers tapped impatiently against the wood as he rehearsed the confrontation he planned to reassert control over the building. But the confidence that had been his shield now wavered beneath the weight of Jasmine Carter's unexpected return and mounting defiance. The knock at his door was firm, deliberate. Without waiting for an invitation, Jasmine entered, her steps measured but unyielding. In her hand, she carried a crisp folder, its contents neatly organized and impossible to ignore. "Mr. Thompson," she began, voice steady and resolute, "I believe it's time we addressed this situation properly." She placed the folder on his desk with a quiet authority that unsettled him. "These are legal documents proving my rights as a tenant, and more importantly, my grounds for a pending lawsuit regarding wrongful eviction." Richard's eyes flicked to the folder, then quickly away, a flicker of unease crossing his features. He opened the top sheet, scanning the text, but finding no immediate way to dismiss it. "This must be some kind of mistake," he muttered, struggling to maintain his composure. "I followed all the proper procedures." Jasmine remained unmoved. "The procedures you followed were flawed and rushed. No reasonable notice was given, and your claims of lease violations lack substantiation." Her tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for argument. "I suggest you review this carefully." Around them, the air seemed to shift. The power dynamic that Richard had wielded so effortlessly began to tilt. Jasmine's poised demeanor and the undeniable weight of the legal papers she presented chipped away at his presumed authority. His usual bluster faltered under her steady gaze. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the building. Tenants whispered in hallways, their voices tinged with hope and newfound courage. Jasmine's stance inspired many, illuminating the possibility that the system's imbalance could be challenged, not with anger, but with knowledge and resolve. In the communal lounge, a small group gathered, discussing the unfolding drama. "She's got the law on her side," one tenant said, eyes bright with admiration. "I never thought to stand up before, but maybe it's time we all did." Richard, meanwhile, found himself isolated. The tenants who once feared eviction now saw Jasmine's strength as a beacon. Their quiet support grew louder, emboldening her position and isolating the landlord further. Determined to reclaim control, Richard summoned a meeting in the building's small conference room, inviting tenants under the guise of addressing their concerns. But as the room filled, it became clear that the balance of power had irrevocably changed. Jasmine stood at the front, documents in hand, ready to speak not just for herself, but for the community she represented. Her voice carried authority and clarity as she outlined the tenants' rights, the landlord's obligations, and the collective power they held when united. The tenants listened intently, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to resolve. Questions were asked, concerns aired, and for the first time, a sense of shared purpose took root within the walls of the building. Richard's attempts to interject were met with polite but firm resistance. His authority, once unquestioned, now faced scrutiny and challenge. The room's atmosphere was charged with a new energy, a mixture of hope, determination, and the undeniable momentum of change. As the meeting concluded, Jasmine's final words echoed in the minds of all present. "Together, we can create a community where respect and fairness are not privileges, but the foundation of our home." Leaving the room, Richard felt the weight of the shift pressing down on him. His attempts to intimidate and control had faltered, replaced by a tenant whose quiet confidence and legal backing had transformed the landscape of power within the building. Outside, the tenants dispersed, their conversations buzzing with the possibilities ahead. Jasmine walked among them, her presence a steady reminder that resilience and preparation could dismantle even the most entrenched inequalities. The building itself seemed to breathe with renewed life, its walls echoing the voices of those who dared to stand up and demand justice. And in that moment, the story of Jasmine Carter was no longer just about one woman. It was about a community awakening to the strength they held when united. The community room buzzed with an electric tension as Jasmine Carter stepped forward to confront the gathering crowd. The tenants, once subdued under Richard Thompson's heavy-handed management, now leaned in, eager to hear the woman who had become their unexpected champion speak with a voice that carried both strength and compassion. Jasmine's gaze swept across the sea of familiar faces, neighbors who had exchanged wary glances during past disputes, now united by a shared frustration and a flicker of hope. "I want to speak openly about what's happened here," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "The eviction I faced was not just a personal hardship, it's a reflection of a broader injustice that affects so many in our community." Her words struck a chord, reverberating through the room as she detailed Richard's unjust actions, the sudden eviction notice, the lack of proper procedure, and the disregard for the lives disrupted by his decisions. She spoke not with anger, but with a measured urgency that demanded acknowledgement. Whispers rippled among the tenants. Some nodded in agreement. Others exchanged stories of their own struggles under Richard's management, delayed repairs, unfair rent increases, and threats that had gone unchallenged for too long. The atmosphere shifted. What had been isolated grievances became a chorus of collective experience. Richard sat stiffly near the back, his usual air of dominance diminished as he listened to the mounting criticism. His attempts to interject were met with firm disapproval, the community no longer willing to tolerate his defensive practices that had long bred resentment. As Jasmine continued, she emphasized the importance of tenant rights and the power that came from unity. "We have to stand together, not just to protect ourselves from unfair treatment, but to create a community where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." The room grew quiet, the weight of her message settling over the crowd. Several tenants, emboldened by her leadership, stood to share their stories, voices that had been silenced by fear now ringing out with clarity and courage. One woman recounted months of ignored maintenance requests that left her family vulnerable to cold winter nights. Another spoke of rent hikes that threatened to uproot her children from their school and neighborhood. Each testimony added to the mounting evidence of systemic neglect and exploitation. The collective voice of the tenants grew louder, and with it, the pressure on Richard intensified. His reputation, once solid within the building, began to fracture under the weight of public scrutiny. Neighbors who had once remained silent now openly questioned his practices, their trust eroding rapidly. Jasmine, sensing the shifting tide, proposed concrete steps forward, organizing tenant committees, hosting workshops on housing rights, and engaging local advocacy groups to ensure accountability. Her vision extended beyond the immediate conflict, aiming to empower the community for lasting change. The tenants responded with cautious optimism, their faces brightening at the prospect of reclaiming control over their living environment. The room, once heavy with tension, now hummed with the promise of solidarity and action. Richard's posture stiffened as the meeting drew to a close. The reality was clear. He was no longer the unchallenged authority in the building. Faced with a unified community and a tenant armed with legal knowledge and determination, his position had become precarious. As the crowd dispersed into the chilly evening, conversations buzzed with plans and possibilities. Jasmine walked through the hallways, her presence a beacon of resilience and hope. The tenants she passed offered smiles and nods of gratitude, their spirits lifted by the sense of collective strength. Outside, the city's lights flickered against the dark sky, mirroring the flicker of change ignited within the building. Jasmine paused briefly at the entrance, taking a deep breath of the cold air, steeling herself for the challenges ahead. Inside, Richard retreated to his office, the silence amplifying his solitude. The echoes of the tenants' voices and Jasmine's unwavering resolve lingered in his mind, a constant reminder that the era of unchecked landlord power was waning. The building, once a symbol of division and fear, now stood as a testament to the power of community and the fight for justice. And at its heart was Jasmine Carter, a woman whose courage had sparked a reckoning, challenging the status quo and reshaping the future for all who called this place home. Jasmine Carter stood before the gathered tenants in the building's community room, the atmosphere thick with anticipation and cautious hope. The months of conflict, tension, and uncertainty had culminated in this moment, a turning point not only for her but for the entire neighborhood. Her voice carried the weight of experience and the clarity of vision as she outlined a path forward, one built on collaboration, education, and shared responsibility. "I believe our community deserves more than just resistance," Jasmine began, her gaze sweeping the room filled with familiar faces eager for change. "We need solutions that empower us all, that give us the tools to protect our homes and build a future where fairness isn't just an ideal, but a reality." She unfolded a detailed plan, affordable housing initiatives that would prioritize long-term residents, tenant rights workshops designed to educate and equip everyone with knowledge of their legal protections, and open forums where landlords and tenants could engage in honest dialogue. More than promises, these were actionable steps aimed at transforming the fragile truce into a lasting partnership. Richard Thompson sat quietly near the back, the once defiant landlord now a reluctant participant in this new chapter. Years of unchallenged authority had been dismantled by Jasmine's unwavering resolve and the community's united front. Yet here he was, invited to join in shaping policies that would require accountability and fairness, concepts that had felt foreign in his previous reign. A hush fell over the room as Jasmine extended an invitation, a gesture of inclusion rather than confrontation. "I encourage Mr. Thompson and anyone else involved in property management to join us. This is an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to rebuild trust." The tenants exchanged glances, some surprised by Jasmine's willingness to bridge divides, others inspired by her leadership. The promise of workshops and initiatives sparked conversations full of cautious optimism. Neighbors who had once felt powerless now began to envision a future where their voices mattered. As the meeting adjourned, Jasmine stepped outside into the crisp evening air. The city lights shimmered against the dark sky, reflecting the glimmers of hope that sparkled in the eyes of those she had come to represent. Her sleek black limousine waited nearby, a symbol of her journey from displacement to leadership, from uncertainty to empowerment. Neighbors gathered on the steps, their faces alight with gratitude and determination. Children played nearby, their laughter weaving through the cold night, embodying the potential of a community reclaiming its strength. Jasmine smiled, knowing the road ahead would demand resilience, but confident that together they could challenge injustice and build something enduring. Richard lingered behind the glass doors, watching the scene unfold. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably, but in this moment of possibility, even he recognized that cooperation might be the only path forward. The tenants were no longer subjects to be managed, but partners in shaping the future of their homes. As Jasmine slipped into the limousine, the crowd's murmurs swelled into a chorus of encouragement and resolve. The building, once a battleground, now stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to the power tenants hold when united, informed, and determined. The night embraced the neighborhood with a quiet promise that justice, equity, and community were not distant ideals, but attainable realities, forged through courage and collective action. And as the limousine disappeared into the city's glow, the spirit of change lingered, leaving behind a legacy of empowerment and the unwavering belief that together they could overcome any obstacle. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.